Hey gang, Zippo. Got the doors open. It's a nice decent day. Got the birds chirping. Got some baby birds making some racket. We're into governor part 2, sticking with the mechanical type governors that I showed in part 1 that work on the premise of centrifugal force to force this weight out to push on this arm to govern your engine speed. Showed you how to adjust your governor and whatnot. Now we're going to take things apart and break down each of these parts to show you what individual mechanical devices are all working together so that your engine is governing properly. A well-adjusted carb obviously is a good start. You have a well-adjusted carb with your main idle jet screw, or your main idle screw adjusted correctly, your main jet screw adjusted properly, and all of your linkages corrected or connected the way they should be, and your governor set the way that it should be. But going on the premise that this thing is set up and ready to run, obviously it's not because it's all apart, but we're going to go ahead and pull apart, and I'm going to show you how everything is connected, because I know I've had a lot of people ask, alright, I took everything apart, I don't remember how it goes back together, so hopefully this is going to help. So let's see what we got here. Alright, I'm going to pull the carburetor away, and you're going to see that there is a single rod right here. That single rod is connected to the butterfly on the back side of the carburetor, and then it comes down and it is connected to the governor arm. You want to disconnect that. When you disconnect that, remember the orientation of your throttle rod. Best way to do that, I usually take different colored markers. I'll put a marker color here and a marker color here if it's an engine I'm not familiar with, so that I get the correct orientation when I go to put things back together. Alright, so there's that. And I'll show you, you can see from the back side what happens. It's easy to see from the front side, but you can see from the front side what happens. I'll show you what happens on the back side. Right here you can see the throttle rod's coming through. It's connected to the governor down here. When you pull your throttle up, it's under spring tension. This moves up, and you'll see this fluctuating depending on the load, and that's perfectly normal. That's the way that it should. That's the way that it should act. So, you may see a little bit of fluctuation when you're under load, and then when you're under a super amount of load, this thing's going to open wide up, and that's what the governor's designed to do. So remember the orientation of your rod when you take your carburetor off, and remember your carburetor is probably going to be full of fuel, so be sure you set it up in a position where you're not going to dump the fuel out, or if you're not going to be revisiting the assembly anytime soon, go ahead and drain the gas out of the carburetor so you don't have any chance of gum up. The best way to do that is just take a wrench, pop your main jet and the retaining nut off at the same time. Don't adjust that, just take this off, drain your carburetor out, and then you're done with that. Alright, and then we've still got a little bit of mechanical governing parts going on here. And you guys are going to notice there's a series of different holes on the fulcrum point, on the governor arm itself. They have specific purposes. For this motor, it has just one spring, and that's to govern only on the high end, not on the low end. So your assembly here is your throttle rod goes into the top hole. I just call this a dog bone because it's what it resembles to me. But your fulcrum arm, your throttle rod will go in the top, your governor control spring will go in the bottom, and then depending on when you get your governor set correctly, there's a series of holes here and a series of divots in the bottom of the governor rod. You can change up how the governor acts if you're wanting more power go into the engine at lower speeds, or vice versa, you're wanting more power at the top end, or if you want a good balanced power band from top to bottom, then you can change the position of this spring on the holes, and the holes are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last hole is the hole that your throttle rod from your carburetor goes into. Just slips right in there like that, and that's what controls your throttle on your carburetor. Now we're going to take this dog bone apart, the fulcrum, and be sure to keep these parts together. Main reason being, it's got a lock washer, a nut, and then a washer. But this isn't a regular washer. This washer has a shoulder on it, and that shoulder, when you tighten this nut down tight, has a deeper shoulder than your fulcrum, which allows the fulcrum to pivot like it's supposed to pivot. So don't lose that stuff. If you lose that and you put a regular washer on and tighten things down, you're going to lock that down. You're going to pull your lever for your throttle. Nothing's going to happen. It's not going to idle up. So just remember that. Now we're going to go ahead and pull the throttle rod off. The throttle rod right here is what you connect your throttle cable to. When you connect your throttle cable, you have two options, and I'm going to pull this apart and show you both options. You can see this bracket up here. That bracket, and mind you, this is an engine that is governed only on the bottom end. I know I keep repeating myself, but the rods are different when you step into a engine that has dual springs here down at the bottom that govern at low speed and at high speed. So you've got this goofy looking little square thing, and on top of this plate there's a plus marked in it, just a stamping, and all that does is, if you look at the bottom of this, you can see that it's crowned, but it's only crowned in one direction. That's so that it can sit in that groove and maintain your low idle. You're also going to use this screw for your main idle, but when you throttle down, this helps you get that adjustment in place. Also on this, there's a little hole that goes through it. You can see it perfectly right there. If you are running your throttle cable from the bottom of the engine to the top, you would use that hole. And in using that hole, I got to reposition the camera here so I can show you guys and make sure that we can see this. Let's get up a little higher and then pan it down just a little. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. This small hole right here is the hole that your throttle rod goes into, and that this nut goes onto right here. Now, if you're coming up from the bottom of the engine, you have these two holes here. These two holes are so that you can put your throttle cable through with throttle cable sheathing lock nuts on them on the bottom part. That comes through, and the wire just gets a right angle bend. It doesn't get the dual bend like this. It gets just a single right angle bend, and that wire then goes through that hole. Then your throttle is controlled from the bottom from the throttle coming up from the bottom of the engine. If you're coming through the top, you use the same assembly procedure. You run the throttle through here, your throttle cable through here. You have your throttle lock nuts here that hold the throttle in place, and then you run it down and you fish it into this hole. In that instance, you do want the double right angle, the 90 and opposed 90 bend on that, because then it goes into the hole. Of course, that hole's too small, but it goes into the hole and locks down, and then allows you to control your throttle coming from the top with your cable. So that helps explain that a little bit. Now we're down to just the governor arm itself. Let me get the camera repositioned here, guys. Down to the governor arm itself. Let's go ahead and pan in on it a bit. Okay. We'll get this out of the way. And another thing that you guys might have noticed, I'm sorry I should have mentioned this before, but if you look here, behind your intake elbow is your throttle rod and throttle cable guide plate, which also has gaskets that goes between your intake arm. And there's a variety of different intake arms available on a number of different engines. They all essentially perform the same tasks. Some of the earlier motors do not have this throttle plate on them. What they have is a means lower on the engine to mount your cable to the throttle, or excuse me, to the governor arm directly. In this case, you're not attaching directly to the governor arm. I'm referring to the Model A's, B's, ZZ's, and engines like that, the older 1930s, 1940s cast irons. So let's get panned back down here. And what do we have left? Well, we've got our fulcrum that we pulled off that is still attached to the spring. And if you're pulling everything apart to do a rebuild, you're going to want to clean everything up. It's a good idea to snap a picture also. I mentioned using a marker to familiarize yourself with what goes where if you're not sure. A photo also is worth 1,000 words. Or better yet, one of the things that I might suggest that you do is climb onto Zippo's channel, because I'm showing it to you right here how to put it together. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop the spring and the fulcrum off of the throttle rod. Maybe. It's arguing with me. Here, let's just pull the whole thing off, then I can get it out of there. Okay. You didn't see me take that off because we're not to that point yet. Alright. Now we've got our governor arm on there. And on our governor arm, you would loosen these, and we just talked about in the previous video how to set your governor, so you shouldn't have any fear popping that off and getting it back to. There goes my camera doing that weird stuff again. I got to remember to reset it. That, or I consider make you guys dizzy. You want me to do that for a while? I know I don't want me to do that for a while. It's sick to my stomach. It's like a strobe light and send you guys into a seizure. I'm not responsible. Anyway, pop your governor arm off. And you want to check for wear on all of your parts, obviously. These engines that have run for 50 or so years, you got to check for different areas of wear. For example, if you look at this governor hole, that's the hole at the end that goes to the carburetor itself. Get my finger behind it. Maybe. Get a good angle. You can see it's kind of egg-shaped. It has worn out some. So what that's going to cause is, as your throttle rod, which I just dropped on the ground, and I'm talking throttle rod going to the carburetor, when your throttle rod moves up and down, instead of being firmly in the hole, see that movement and that play? That can cause you a little bit of surging, because each time the carburetor opens to compensate, it increases the speed of the engine, and the governor says, uh-oh, going too fast, and it tries to pull it back down. So worn out parts can be a cause of surging in your engine, or lobing or loping. A lot of people have different terminology for it, but when the engine is running under no load and it sits there and goes run, 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 well, check for worn out stuff like that. And what can you do in the event that that's wore out like that? Well, get another governor arm. If you don't have another governor arm available to you, there is a way to flatten that metal using a drift punch and you smack it on an anvil or a hard surface. Most vices have a small anvil plate on the backs of them, like, where's it at? Like that one. Okay, where's the engine? Let me get back out. There's the engine. You can flatten that out a little bit, and when you flatten that out a little bit, that will push the metal back up to make that hole a little more concentric. So it's just an idea. All right, it's going to wear out again, and it's going to wear out quicker because the metal's now thinner, but that is an option if you don't have another governor available to you. You guys are going to have to excuse me, it's allergy season and I've got to get my nasal spray before I start doing a bunch of sniffing. Okay, gotta love allergies. And while I'm at it, since that stuff is kind of nasty. Okay, thanks for hanging in with me on my break. I know I sometimes take really long breaks, and that one was a doozy. All right, what have we got left? Well, we've got the governor arm sticking out of the block, and what you have in there is on the back side, on the inside of the engine, you have a tiny little cotter pin, which is probably not going to come out easily for me. Yeah, it did. A tiny little cotter pin, and you have a washer. Okay. Sometimes these are outside of the engine, sometimes they're inside, sometimes you don't have them at all. If you don't have this at all, this came off of a Model 19, this is a 23FB, so stands to read. This one was on the outside. I have seen them on the inside, retaining clips on the inside that keeps the governor rod from the internal mechanical governor rod from slipping out off of the bushing. What would happen if it did? Well, if you look, you've got a small contact patch right here. That small contact patch, if this slips too far, let me go ahead and pull this pin out again. Washer off. Okay. If this slips too far like that, what it's going to do is it's going to skip completely off the tip of the governor, and you're going to have no governing capabilities. And another thing that'll happen is that instance will happen if this is not tight enough also. This particular engine, as you can see, I can move that in and out, but when I put this on, and you want them snugged up pretty good, when I put this on, that keeps this from coming out. But on closer inspection, there is a hole in this governor, and it is identical to this on the mechanical governor rod, and it is identical to this one. There should be a washer and a cotter pin in it, so there is a hole here. So that's my bad, my mistake. So that's what holds that in place and keeps that arm from going too far into the block to where it is not making contact with the mechanical governor. So now, folks and fellers, we're going to flip this block over after I take the intake elbow off, and I'm going to show you guys the internal workings and exactly how it rides on the cam and the whole nine there. So we're going to stop this video because the external mechanical governor assembly is disassembled. We'll start back in, give you guys a visual on the inside of what exactly is going on with the governor in there. So this is Zippo. Stay tuned. I will get back with you guys after a slightly longer break. It's lunchtime. Later, I'm out.